It's one of the most fascinating political contests in the world, the race for the White House. Since 2000, the US presidential election has not lacked drama or suspense. Every 4 years, the world watches to see what issues will carry the day, who will win the presidency, and how the election system will affect the outcome. America has an indirect election process that dates to its origins. But how does it work, and why is the system itself often as controversial as the issues that shape the campaigns? Hello and welcome to the special US election edition of Our Voices. I'm Haydé FitzPatrick. America has an election system like no other, with wall-to-wall media coverage of primaries and caucuses, political conventions and speeches, battleground state campaign ads and rallies, opinion polls, and then there's election night with race results flashing across TV screens and social media. This year, the coronavirus pandemic is affecting how candidates campaign and how Americans vote. The stakes are high, and so is the political drama. Why are American elections such a visual spectacle? I put that question to VOA's White House correspondent, Patsy Widakuswara.
Well, I would argue that elections everywhere, in almost every country is a spectacle. It's just that it's spectacle in a different way. And since Americans have had elections since, for 240 plus years, we have developed our own brand of spectacle, our own brand of political theater, and it really just starts from the very long period of what's called the primary season. This is an election just to say who from each party gets to represent the party. And then, of course, the long presidential campaign that's really focused on a number of what we call swing states. These are states that could determine the election. It could go either to the Democrats or Republicans. So there's a lot that goes on in there. But I would say the short answer is that it's a spectacle because Americans have been having elections in their own way for 240 plus years. And so here we are. I would highlight one thing, though. I've covered elections in the US since 2004. This is the first time where both sides are actually quite concerned about the possibility of not only post-election litigation in terms of having the courts determine who the winner is, but also post-election friction, if not violence.
Now, of course, Patsy, this is all happening in the middle of a pandemic. For the Republicans and the Democrats, what matters most to whom in this election?
So there's a really big difference in approach between the campaigns. And for the Biden campaign, it goes along with their political interests, right? They're trying to make this election become a referendum on President Trump's handling of COVID-19, whereas the White House, the Trump administration, has the political interest to show that we are rounding a corner, we're rounding a turn on this pandemic, and that we will end it soon. And so because of those two different competing political interests, their approaches are also different.
VOA's White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara speaking to me here in Washington, D.C. Now, Republican and Democratic candidates are not the only ones running for US president. So-called third-party candidates have played a significant role in recent presidential elections. But could they make an impact this time? VOA's Elizabeth Lee has more.
In the contest for the White House, it is well known that President Donald Trump is running for re-election as a Republican, and running against him is former Vice President Joe Biden, a Democrat. What is less well known is that there are other people running for U.S. president on other party tickets.
The Peace and Freedom Party, the American Independent Party, but people really often don't know who these parties are.
People running for smaller parties are called third-party candidates. In the 2020 presidential race, two candidates from better-known third parties include Joe Jorgensen of the Libertarian Party and Howie Hawkins of the Green Party. Another third-party candidate who has made headlines is rapper Kanye West.
The most puzzling campaign, but the one that's gathered the most attention for his party, the birthday party. He's often talked about religion openly in his reps, and so he might appeal to more religiously conservative voters.
While third-party candidates are generally not considered serious contenders for the presidency, they can play a role in changing the dynamics of an election. One example is the 2016 race between Trump and Democrat Hillary Clinton.
There's no question in 2016 that the third-party candidates hurt Hillary Clinton. All the exit polling showed that the votes that they were casting for third-party candidates were votes that otherwise would have gone to the Democrats.
2016 was a year in which there are a lot of Americans looking at Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton weren't thrilled with either choice, and they cast one of these protest votes.
But experts agree the 2020 election is different.
It's very clear now that the stakes are so high that either Joe Biden or Donald Trump will be the next president, and nobody wants to throw their vote away. And so we're seeing those third-party candidates polling at a lot lower numbers.
Clinton may have lost some votes to third-party candidates in 2016 because of how some Americans viewed her. But Biden does not face the same perception.
Hillary Clinton was seen as a darling of Wall Street and of high finance and these global trade deals that didn't give enough attention to the lives of working class people in blue-collar jobs across America. I think Joseph Biden is from a working class background, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I think he can connect with that demographic even if he's associated with some of those trade deals.
The pandemic is also keeping third-party candidates from gaining traction in 2020 because it's tough for them to campaign in person. Third-party candidates also don't have the funds necessary to pay for big TV advertising campaigns.
The absence of third-party candidates that are strong this year should benefit the Democrats.
But as the outcome in 2016 proved, a presidential election can be quite unpredictable. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News.
Now, this election is not just about the race for the presidency. The U.S. Congress is up for re-election, including much of the 100-seat Senate. Now, control of Congress is just as important for political parties and the U.S. president as control of the White House. Why? Let me put it this way. You can't get as much done as U.S. president if Congress is controlled by another party. And you can't get much done in Congress if the presidency is controlled by another party. The Democrats are up against the Republicans' 53-47 Senate control, and all eyes are now on several key races that could either flip or secure a GOP majority. Now, a key thing to remember about U.S. presidential elections is that the Electoral College determines who wins the White House, not the national popular vote. So what is the Electoral College? Why does it exist? And how does it work? VOA's Allan explains.
Let's change it. When you vote for
From afar, a U.S. election probably looks like a nationwide referendum on a couple of candidates. But actually, it's an aggregation of elections held in each of the 50 states. The more populous the state, the more votes it has in what is called the Electoral College.
The Electoral College dates back to the battle over the Constitution, right after the founding of the country and our current form of government, which dates back to 1789. And the Electoral College was a system that I think was kind of designed as essentially some kind of a compromise between some of the bigger states and the smaller populated states. It wasn't a system designed for a world in which essentially everyone could vote personally for president. I think the idea was that the state legislatures would essentially allot the electoral college votes, and they would essentially choose who the president was. And so it wasn't the kind of system that we have now, and yet we still have this kind of, I think, sort of antiquated way of doing this.
7 states have the fewest number of electoral votes. 3, 1 for the state's U.S. House of Representatives, and 2 for the state's U.S. Senators. The District of Columbia gets the minimum 3 as well. California, New York, Texas, and Florida have the most electoral votes. The popular vote winner in each state typically gets all of the state's electoral votes. The objective? Win enough states to reach 270 electoral votes, a simple majority of the 538 electoral votes available. In 2016, Democrat Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by about 3 million votes, but Republican Donald Trump won the Electoral College by more than 70 electoral votes, flipping 6 states that voted Democrat in 2012, winning Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania by fewer than 80,000 votes. So who are the electors, and how do they elect the president?
The candidates themselves will put up a slate of electors. And so there are people who typically, and they could be any number of different people from different walks of life, but there are people who hypothetically, and if the campaign does their job, they're people who should be pretty loyal to their presidential candidates. A lot of states actually bind the electors, meaning that even if they wanted to vote, if they wanted to break against the candidate that they're bound to, they're not allowed to. Not every state binds electors, and you do sometimes have so-called faithless electors.
In 2016, 7 electors, 2 Republicans and 5 Democrats, broke their pledge to vote for their party's nominee. While that's the highest number in history, it did not change the outcome. Electors meet in December to cast their ballots, which are counted and certified during a joint session of Congress next January.
There you have it. It's about the map and the math. After the break, we look at the battleground state of Florida and why President Donald Trump and his Democratic challenger Joe Biden are campaigning so hard there. We'll be right back. Watching a special edition of Our Voices. Welcome back. Another unusual characteristic of the US presidential election is that many states allow people to vote early, either by mail or in person, and even before election day. Early voting can impact the outcome, particularly in swing or battleground states. Now, these are states that often have split support for Democrats and Republicans. The southern state of Florida is one of America's biggest swing states. It's chosen the winner of the last 6 presidential contests. VOA's Carolyn Presutti reports from Miami on what it will take to carry the state.
It says indefinite voluntary departure. That meant I was never coming back.
As a young girl, Rita was part of Operation Peter Pan, as thousands of children left communist Cuba in the early 1960s. She fears a slide to socialism if Democrat Joe Biden becomes president.
This flirting with socialism and with the leftist kind of thing or whatever, that's a big mistake for our country, a big mistake.
Biden is a moderate, but that doesn't sway Rad, who chose to vote early for President Donald Trump, hand-delivering her ballot.
I have an idea.
Some say that every day is Election Day in Florida because it has more early voters than any other state in the country. More than 1 million Floridians like Rita have already cast their ballots. Even a stroke couldn't keep Mike Webley from voting early in person. He's for Joe Biden.
He has a better idea of what's needed to get this country back on track, and that his policies are more inclusive.
Across the country, voters are smashing early voting records, either in person or by mail. The top reason? The coronavirus.
Social distancing among some groups doesn't seem to be a standard fare, so again, that's why I'm doing absentee this year.
Not Christian Johnson. He's selling T-shirts promoting November 3rd as Election Day. That's when he'll vote for Biden.
Everybody's scared now. You got the coronavirus, you got this and that. You know what I'm saying? But you have to live too. You know what I'm saying? You can't be scared forever or live in a bubble forever.
Trump and Biden differ on when their supporters should vote. The president encourages voters to go in person on Election Day, asserting without evidence that voting by mail is plagued by fraud.
Be very careful, a lot of shenanigans going on.
From Joe Biden, a different message.
You can still request your vote by mail ballot and do it as soon as you can.
Historically, Republicans were more likely to vote early. Not this year. According to the University of Florida's Election Project, early voting Democrats are outpacing Republicans by a 2-to-1 margin. Rich Exner crunches political statistics for Cleveland.com.
It seems like the intensity is higher than I've ever noticed before in terms of not only people voting early, but wanting to get their ballot in early.
It's the same in Virginia, second only to Florida in the number of early voters.
Yeah, I have to work today, but this is more important right now.
If the trend continues, it could signal record turnout, far beyond the 55% that voted in 2016. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, Miami, Florida.
Now, the U.S. election is also big business for political consultants and strategists. They work on everything from organizing political campaigns, marketing and fundraising, to helping politicians run for office or win the presidency. They can make an impact on political candidates, the voters, and the outcome. And that's why some American political consultants are so highly sought after in foreign countries. VOA's Elizabeth Lee has the story.
From in-person rallies to grassroots outreach to ads, political campaigning in the U.S. is in a league of its own.
I think a lot of people view U.S. elections as sort of this Super Bowl of elections, or the World Cup of elections, because we do just have so much money pouring in.
The amount of money in a political campaign and frequency of U.S. elections at all levels of government have turned campaign strategizing into a full-time profession. Former strategist Bob Shrum has worked on campaigns in the U.S. and abroad.
We're in a permanent campaign so that people are really professionally committed, involved in, and thinking about this all the time.
He says foreign politicians look for experienced strategists to tap into campaign savvy found in America. The business of international political consulting took off in the early 90s after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, says political consultant Riva Levinson.
That's what permitted the U.S. political consulting business to be realized in places like Latin America, former Soviet Union, Africa, because people started becoming democratic in our model.
Shrum, who advised U.S. politicians and consulted in a host of other countries, including Britain, Israel, and Colombia, says messaging is critical in any campaign, regardless of cultural differences.
When we first were involved in Colombia, the style of advertising that prevailed was basically for the candidate for 30 seconds to stand there in front of a giant crowd, and the crowd would cheer. And we said, we really need to make some spots where you just talk to people one-on-one about what you're going to do.
Levinson has been consulting in various African countries for more than 3 decades, including Liberia, where she advised Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who became the first democratically elected female president in Africa in 2005. Now, many countries are more experienced with campaigns, and so international strategists need to stay on top of their field.
You're not putting a campaign 101 in front of people. You've got to come to the table with something specifically value added that they don't have.
Levinson says that means working on the integrity of the election process where corruption and intimidation may exist. With the widespread use of the internet and social media, digital advisors like Jiore Craig have also come on board.
In some countries in Asia, you have 100% of the population on social media now. When you look at the data and it's showing you trends like that, you have to adjust your strategy accordingly.
Craig has worked as a digital consultant in Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. She not only translates online data into useful information for campaigns, she also helps weed through disinformation tactics.
I would say the number one thing I help campaigns with is understanding what type of online attack is significant and what is something they can ignore.
Craig says there's a trend of homegrown political consultants emerging in many countries around the world as the business of political consulting matures, and U.S. experts are no longer the only game in town. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News.
We're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, we highlight African immigrant voters. What's driving them this election season? We'll also check in with 2 experts who say they know who will win the presidency. You don't want to miss this. Stay with us. Being part of Our Voices is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them.
and bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
Welcome back to this special edition of Our Voices as we continue our in-depth look at how the American election system works. Now, the US elections also give a glimpse into how the electorate is changing as political campaigns try to tap into the growing voting power of immigrants eligible to vote. Civic groups in the African diaspora say 2020 has seen a rising number of African-born American citizens registering to vote. But how big is that number, and what do African immigrant voters care about? VOA Salem Solomon takes a look.
The African diaspora in the United States is mobilizing voter drives as organizers believe 2020 is a time for these voters to flex their political muscles as never before. Nika Achapu is the founder of the African Public Affairs Committee, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates policies for the empowerment of the African diaspora.
Our goal is to empower people into learning that they have a voice, they have a say in the policies, in the laws that are actually brought forth and are affecting us as Africans living in this country.
According to the latest U.S. Census figures, in 2018, there were over 2 million foreign-born Africans in the country. Overall, 50.6% of immigrants are naturalized citizens and 94.4% are 18 years old or older and likely have voting rights. But the diverse and dispersed nature of the population in the U.S. makes it hard for African voters to organize. But organizers say concerns of U.S. voters of African descent aren't much different than the U.S. population at large. Because many African immigrants work in frontline roles, the COVID-19 response is a major concern.
A lot of our African diaspora members are in the trenches and working, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in transporting people, whether it's bagging groceries. We are pretty much everywhere.
But one issue voters of African descent are particularly concerned about is immigration. Organizers say each year tens of thousands of Africans are admitted to the U.S. as refugees, escaping places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, and Eritrea. Because of this, Africans are particularly concerned with recent changes to the immigration system, restricting numbers of immigrants. In 2020, the U.S. will admit a total of 18,000 refugees and 15,000 in 2021. The U.S. State Department says the reduction reaffirms America's enduring commitment to assist the world's most vulnerable people while fulfilling our first duty to protect and serve the American people.
Many African families have been here for 2, 3, 4, or even more generations. And so they feel like their children and their children's children need to be protected now. And so they are now galvanizing support from one another in their communities to register to vote in order to defeat and change some of those policies now.
In Texas, Achapu's organization has been hosting voter registration and census drives. Achapu added that she is encouraging people of African descent, including first-time voters, to research candidates on local level and ask them questions about the issues that matter most.
That's when you can decide, okay, this is the candidate that represents my values, my morals, and what I think means progress.
Salem Solomon, VOA News, Washington.
Now, if you're wondering who will win this election, I'm here to tell you I don't know. One unique feature of US elections is the many public opinion polls which gauge the candidate's popularity during the race. VOA's Patsy Whitakuswara called up two experts who say, forget the polls. They've devised prediction models and they're ready to call the outcome.
As we found in 2016, polls can be incorrect. So we asked two experts who have pretty good track records at predicting the outcome of a presidential race.
Allan J. Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University, and I have successfully forecast the outcomes of all 9 elections since 1984.
I'm Helmuth Norpoth, Professor of Political Science at Stony Brook University. I predict elections, and the model I've developed gets 25 out of 27 elections since 1912 right.
Okay, what about methodology? Lichtman uses 13 keys, true or false questions about matters like the economy, foreign policy, party unity, and a candidate's charisma. A true answer earns a point for the incumbent, while a false answer earns a point for the challenger.
And if 6 or more keys are out against the White House party, they're a predicted loser.
Norpoth's primary model uses presidential election statistics since 1912 with 1 key metric: which candidate won the early presidential primaries or state-level elections to choose a party's presidential nominee for the November election.
I have another predictor, which I call sort of the swing of the pendulum, that one can track for almost 200 years.
The verdict?
Donald Trump has a 91% chance of winning the election.
Donald Trump will lose his re-election bid.
Lichtman changed his prediction after the pandemic and social unrest.
What was his name?
As of late 2019, he gave the election to Trump. But
so in just a matter of a few months, Donald Trump and the Republicans went from what looked like a sure win with just 4 keys against them to a predicted loss with 7 keys, 1 more than needed to predict their defeat.
For Norpoth, a registered independent, neither pandemic nor protest has a bearing on his verdict.
My forecast that I make is unconditional and final. It's written in stone. It cannot bend, but it may break in the end. There's a chance, like 9%, that it's gonna come out wrong. So that's a chance I'm taking.
While both scholars say their predictions are final, Lichtman, a Democrat, said there are 2 things out of his model's control: election meddling and voter suppression.
The Republican base is old white guys like me. That is the most shrinking part of the electorate. The GOP cannot manufacture new old white guys, but what they can try to do is suppress the vote of the rising Democratic base of minorities and young people. That has me worried.
Neither Lichtman nor Norpoth is even looking at polls for their crystal ball.
We're living in an age of cancel culture, woke politics, etc., and maybe some people are reluctant to admit, even to a pollster, that they're supporting Donald Trump because it doesn't sound right, doesn't sit right with a lot of people.
Whoever wins, remember that you heard it first from one of these guys. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
I think that should clear it up for you. Thank you so much for watching. That's our show this week. We will see you on the other side of the November 3rd election. Until then, go well. Goodbye.